This is Far From Home. I'm Scott Gurian, and it's now been nearly a full year since I've used my passport, been in an airport, or traveled anywhere more than a few hours away. All this time, I've been doing whatever I can to feed my wanderlust and fend off cabin fever, like spending plenty of time outdoors when the weather's been nice, going hiking and camping, and cooking recipes from around the world. Now, I'll be the first to admit that there's no real substitute for visiting a foreign country and experiencing what it's like to be totally immersed and surrounded by different languages, foods, and cultures. But during this period when travel hasn't really been possible, exploring places closer to home has given me a greater appreciation for all the fascinating and undiscovered adventures it's possible to have right in my own backyard. Today's episode is about one of those adventures I went on recently, which began in a park not far from my home.
Hey everyone, welcome to beautiful Sunday morning. If you have a headlamp or a flashlight, is really great. We have a bunch. I have a bunch of walking sticks I can give to people. They really help. Some of the rocks are slippery occasionally. Don't worry about getting wet. That's just life. You probably had a shower and got wet this morning. It's just water.
That's my friend and colleague Ian Kerr, who's a designer and a professor at Montclair State University. Ian has a pretty diverse background with interests in creativity, ecology, philosophy, and generally just thinking outside the box. He's one of the most curious and experimental people I know, so I jumped at the chance when I heard that he would be leading a group of about a dozen people on an expedition along Toney's Brook, this little stream that runs through the town of Montclair, near where I live. Now, before you think that this is just an ordinary nature hike, let me set the scene. My home state of New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the U.S., and land around here is incredibly valuable. So it won't come as a surprise that as there's been more and more development over the years, town engineers made the unfortunate decision to bury much of Toney's Brook underground. Today, if you drive around the neighborhood, you'll occasionally see places where it peeks up its head, like in a park, but you really need to look for it. For the most part, it's just not a place that I or most other people I know ever really think about. Now, we were going to explore Toney's Brook, tunnels and all. Ian told me he's wanted to lead tours here ever since he discovered it on his own several years ago.
And I was so blown away. And then I did it a few times with different people and some students. And it was like, this is the way to understand one strata of Montclair so differently. I equate it like with the railway tracks. You know, railway tracks, you see people's backyards, goes through the industrial parts, the parts you never see of a town. The creek does that 100 times more because it's following its own path and everything's built around it. So you see the ruins of history and industry. You see how people have made it their own with their yards in all sorts of ways. Some people have little bridges between neighbors. People have cantilevered their parking decks over it, got more space. All these different things that you'd never know. And I think it's also a barometer of the health, the ecological health. Like, are there fish in there? What plants are growing?
How did you think about the town differently after you did this the first time?
I mean, it changed my entire view of the place. I think when you walk the creek, you realize we live in this complicated ecosystem rather than simply a town full of people that has the odd tree and lawn.
On this Sunday morning, our group ranged from school-aged children to adventurous senior citizens. They wore backpacks and galoshes, ready for an adventure, but not entirely sure what to expect.
So we're going to start. We're going to walk over a block, and then we're going to sneak through somebody's yard and hop into the creek, and off we go. We're just going to jump in, and we'll just be wet and happy.
So there we were in the middle of a suburban neighborhood, not exactly where you'd imagine going to embark on an adventure, but sometimes the most interesting things are found in the places you least expect. It was alongside the driveway of an unremarkable-looking gray house that we began our journey.
Here's the little brook, winding its way between some houses here. And we're just climbing down into it.
I'm going to start. If you help people, okay. We'll do it. I can do it. We'll make sure everyone gets down.
Okay, we've just gotten down into the brook. The water's kind of chilly. We're sloshing around here, heading up to our first bridge. Actually kind of ducking down and walking under the roadway. Let's see, I'm about 6 feet tall, so the tunnel's probably 4 feet in height. So you gotta bend down and walk here. Kind of hurts your back a little bit after a while. Little bits of light coming through the ceiling in places from, I guess, storm drain tunnels from the roadway above us. And tons of cobwebs under here. Ooh, I think I've got some on my head here. Ugh. Looks like all kinds of creatures live under here.
Oh, beautiful. Oh, wow.
Huh.
Look at them.
Oh, just the people ahead of us. Yeah, with the light in the distance behind them from the other end of the tunnel, you see kind of their silhouettes.
There were deeper and shallower parts, but the water mostly came up to our thighs. Now, I should explain that I grew up in this area and have lived here for much of my life. I'm pretty familiar with all the streets in this neighborhood, but this was an entirely different perspective than I'd ever seen before. And it turns out I wasn't the only one.
Tell me your name.
I'm Lauren.
And why did you come here today?
You know, I came here because I'm very interested in the history of the Brook and who inhabited the land before us, the Lenape tribe. And, you know, I'm very adventurous and love hiking, and so I wanted an adventure, especially, you know, living in an era of a global pandemic, just that sense of community and coming together socially distanced, but having that human interaction as well.
And how long have you lived here in town?
So I've lived here about 2 years.
I guess you know your way around town pretty well, but this is like a part of town that most people, I guess, never really get a chance to see.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're walking on top of it day to day, and it's something that we take for granted or we don't even realize. So to open your mind to something further is just kind of magical.
After we all exited the tunnel, Ian regrouped us on the other side.
You know, one way to think of Montclair is to think of it as part of a watershed. The Passaic watershed curves around these mountains, and it drains a massive area behind us and all the way up to New York State. There's many, many tributaries coming into it. Toney's Brook goes into Second River, and Second River flows into the Passaic. And the Passaic River flows down into Newark Bay, and it parallels the Hackensack River and then the Hudson River. Everything flows in it. Our herbicides or pesticides, whatever we're doing is infecting this whole basin.
Ian encouraged us to be mindful of the people downstream by not using pesticides on our lawns. The good news, he said, was that this part of the brook we were walking in was pretty far upstream, so the water here was probably fairly clean. And if any of us had any lingering fears that this was just some sort of polluted little ditch, those were quickly dashed when, at one point during our journey, a young girl who was part of our group emptied some water from her boot, and a decent-sized fish actually swam out of it, catching everyone by surprise. Ian said there was actually a lot of nature around us that we should appreciate.
I just want to introduce you to a couple really wonderful plants of the urban ecosystem. This is Japanese knotweed. In Japan, it co-evolved with lava fields, so it loves compacted soils and sidewalks and parking lots. It's a phytoremediator, so it's pulling up a lot of toxins. So it's a really important urban plant that gets disparaged as invasive, which is a problematic term. Obviously, in other ecosystems, they can be a nuisance, but in ours, they're primarily really good. Also, you'll see a lot of it's still in bloom. It's really great for pollinators. It turns out, if you look at this rootstock has the same ingredient that you find in red wine that's so good for you. In Japan, it's a really powerful medicinal. There's research with viruses like COVID on it. So, great plant.
And we're continuing to wind our way through this brook. Sand and silt on the bottom, so you got to watch where you step because your feet sort of sink into it. And we're going right through people's backyards and side yards. There's some people out here kind of looking at us. I think we're crazy. Hello. Can I talk to you quickly? What are your names?
I'm Caitlin.
Matt.
And you live here in this house?
We do.
And have you ever seen anyone walking through this brook here?
This is the first time.
Never.
Maybe to get like a frisbee or something, but this is the most.
Yeah, the kids lose
intense.
volleyballs and basketballs in here once in a while, but that's about it.
Would you ever consider going down here yourself?
It's a beautiful creek. It's clean water, so yeah, definitely.
We'll see how long the pandemic lasts. Maybe by next spring, we'll need this as a respite.
Passing through people's backyards, a few of us wondered aloud how legal all this was. Like, were we actually trespassing? But Ian assured us not to worry.
You know, the property thing is so fascinating with rivers because technically waterways are the last piece of commons coming from Roman law. So navigatable waterways are unownable. If it's a navigatable waterway, you can be in it as long as you don't block the navigation. So technically, there would be probably lots of legal debates, but this is the only piece of non-ownable property in Montclair as a navigatable waterway. And it only has to have been historically navigatable. As long as you have a boat that's navigatable, you could dock off Manhattan and just live there. So, in Brooklyn, up the Passaic, the Hackensack, you could all in a houseboat live there for free, technically. I'm not sure how long you could make an argument for living in here with your navigatable device, but there might be some pro bono lawyer that wants a real challenge.
Now, feeling absolved of our crimes, we kept on going.
And we're coming up to the town high school here, and the brook actually flows right underneath it.
Wow.
Baby.
All right, I hope you guys could really notice how interesting that creek is up there, the qualities of it. The water starts to build up as we go. I just want to point out another plant we're seeing a lot of along here. This is mugwort. You can eat it as a flavoring. If you just take a leaf, and I'll pass it around and you can smell it. This is the smell of English beer before hops. It was used to preserve beer. If you were in the 12th century in England, this is how your beer would smell. You have to crush a leaf to really get it, right? And then it's also used medicinally as an abortant. Some states have banned the use of it because they're, have very strong convictions about women's bodies. So it's an interesting, highly contentious plant, but it's delicious as a flavoring. People use it also, it leads to lucid dreaming, supposedly. I don't know if that's true or not.
Ian explained that many of these plants growing along the banks of this creek used to be more well-known and well-regarded for their important uses, but now they've fallen out of favor and are just considered weeds. He said it's kind of like how our thinking about the brook itself has changed over the years.
We're going into an old industrial zone of Montclair, and that area was all a bunch of mills. There's a paper factory, a string factory, there was a brewery. Further up, there were things like lumber mills, all using the river as power. So it was much more industrially utilized. This creek is this astonishing resource that binds Montclair. And if there was a way to celebrate it, there's a way to make it part of, a valued ecological resource. Like how Chicago uses its creeks and rivers. A lot of cities do in North America. In Europe, there's a bunch of great examples, but just making it public space and you can come down to it, it would be astonishing.
We walked several miles more, following the brook under the town basketball and tennis courts. At one point, we emerged in a park where there was an ice cream truck driving by. People were just hanging out on a lazy weekend afternoon. They saw our group with our galoshes and walking sticks, dripping wet, and it felt like we were aliens who just landed from the moon. But if I had to pick a highlight of the day, it was this one.
We've just entered, I think it's the longest tunnel of the whole trek. Probably a quarter of a mile long or something. It's very big. It's like pitch black here. Let me turn on my headlamp. Got a little bit of light. And we are right by the town post office, starting to head under this giant parking lot area. It's really cool how much there is to discover so close to my own home. Literally right under my feet. There's this whole world to explore. And I think a lot of people don't realize they just take things around them for granted. If you really look around a bit, there's fascinating things all around you.
And I wasn't the only one who was impressed. My brother Drew and his girlfriend Miranda, who joined us on our journey, were also amazed by the whole experience.
It's really cool. And it makes you feel like a 10-year-old just exploring again.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Just like going in your own backyard and like running around and
Getting dirty. It's fun.
picking up shells. Like there was a lot of like nostalgia there, but it's fun to experience that as an adult and still have that kind of magic. Yeah.
But if you really want to feel that sense of childhood wonder, who better to turn to than an actual kid, like 11-year-old Andy, who came with his father John.
What do you think of this?
Super cool, because at the end of this we can say we went underground Montclair.
You gonna tell your friends about this?
Yes, definitely.
Are there places near where you live that you've discovered for the first time during the pandemic, or for which you now have a renewed appreciation? If so, I'd love to hear about them. You could drop me a line at info@farfromhomepodcast.org. You could also contact Far From Home through Facebook or Instagram, where I've posted photos this week of our expedition. The walk along Toney's Brook took place as part of Montclair Design Week, which happens every October. If you live in the New York, New Jersey area, or know someone who does, and want to attend next year's annual Brook Walk, you could follow Design Week's parent organization, Design Shed, on Instagram or Facebook, or just visit designshed.org. I had editorial assistance this time from Katie McGee. My show's logo comes from Polemic, which designs award-winning experiences all over the world at the intersection of culture, commerce, and community. Find out if they could help your business at polemicdesign.com. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and thanks for listening.